And here we go. We're back here on the Gill Athletics Connections Track and Field podcast. So, you hear me say this every week, but it's the truth. I'm just so blessed, so honored that you'd press play today to listen to this podcast, this episode, and just excited, man. We continue to roll through season 5. Season 5 is getting close to the end. I never thought I would see a season 5. So to start having the switch over to 2025 and season 6, it's coming up. We've got some amazing guests coming up still. Everyone's amazing. I just have such a good time, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. Speaking of ride, let's get into today's episode. This is going to be interesting. I don't know much. It's a distance runner. You guys know me. I'm not a distance guy, so I don't know a lot about what they do on that side. I kind of oversimplify it, but I'm keen to learn today and learn this journey. Help me welcome from Brown University, the wise, the wonderful Mr. John Kenworthy. John, how are you, sir?
Great. How you doing, Mike?
I had to catch myself. You have John Ken, and I wanted to go into Idity, Kennedy, and I was like,
Yeah,
no, Worthy, not Idity.
I know, especially now that I'm out here in Rhode Island, it's I'm getting close to that territory.
That's right. I'm sure you're making Kennedy money now that you're out there and you're close to Kennedy Kenworthy, right?
Yeah,
Probably
that's it.
close. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You've been around long enough to know that's a very good joke.
I just saw this morning a coach made a tweet, and he said something about he was really happy that he got out of coaching for a bit to do I think he went into the accounting world, and now he wants to get back. And he goes, and I understand, coming back, I probably have to do small school or something like that to work my way up, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. He goes, but can I get more than 28K? And I was like, oh man, we're still paying entry level coach. Yeah, I say entry level, first level 28. Like, it's so sad. It really does. It's not right. I literally responded, was like, you deserve more than 28. Like, I mean, come on. Why are we not
Yeah,
paying our coaches more than
yeah,
$28,000 a year, for crying out loud?
yeah.
I shake my head. I shake my head. We got to do better. We got to do better. Well, John, let's talk about you, man. I'm super excited, super interested in this. You were nominated to be here on the podcast, and I absolutely love that because that shows the impact that you're making, that someone else thought so worthy of what you do and how you do it that they would reach out to me to have you on the show. That's a really cool thing. Like maybe just under being a Hall of Famer one day. I think that's the number 2. Hall of Fame first, nominated to be here on the podcast. So want to give a shout out to Marty Ogden, my sports results dot. I don't think it's .com. I think it's .tv. Do you know?
I don't know. No,
Yeah.
actually.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. He's yelling at me right now. I just know he is.
Yeah, yeah.
But Marty, thank you, brother. I appreciate you nominating John, and we're excited to dive in. So, John, let's get started here. Somewhere, assuming you were a track athlete, track had to come into your life. Where does track and field start for you?
Yeah, middle school. It was cross country. Um, Eighth grade, I think, is when I really first decided like that running was a thing. I ran spring track in seventh grade, but it was sort of just like you're a seventh grader, you just found something to do, and maybe like that's where the seed got planted because obviously I ended up in cross country in eighth grade as well, and I went to a school that didn't really have a lot going on track or cross country distance side, but we had a coach who was really enthusiastic at the high school level, and because our school was pretty small and the program was pretty small, that the middle schoolers and the high schoolers sort of ended up together a lot. We had a track over at an elementary school, so there wasn't it wasn't just one or the other. We sort of all had to go to this place together, and just ended up sort of meeting the high school kids and our coach that was there, and obviously somehow through the track season got convinced to do cross country, and then through the cross country season got convinced to stick with it. And then by the time I was a freshman, I was doing all 3 seasons, and um, was really excited. Uniquely, that coach left after my freshman year, so sort of the groundwork got laid, but then had a very different experience for the next few years. So yeah.
Where are we growing up at? Where's all this taking place?
Yeah, it's in Gloversville, New York. It's
Okay.
upstate New York, sort of between Utica and Albany,
Yeah, yeah.
foothills of the Adirondacks. Yeah, right along the thruway there.
Yeah.
So
What did you think? And maybe you didn't think at all because you're, a freshman. Like when we talk about a college athlete, we talk about, oh, we got a new coach. Like that's usually this may be a little bit too strong of a word, traumatic experience, but it's an event. Like, oh, we got new coaches. I had to learn the new style, yada yada. I thought about transferring, or I did, or whatever.
Yeah.
I never really heard that in the high school. So I went through the same, but after junior year. So my senior year, we got all new
Yeah.
coaches, and it was kind of an event because it was a whole new training style for one, but never one that we were like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't do track now. Like it wasn't that traumatic. Did you even think about it as a freshman going into sophomore year? Or it was like, man, I'm still so new. I barely learned the first guy's name, you know?
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely thought about it. The coaches that I had been working with in one of them in middle school was a woman who was a really successful runner. And then the one that was the high school coach was her husband. So it was a husband and wife team. And
Oh,
so that sort of connection was there. And I was fortunate when I came in, there was a girl on the team who was very good and very accomplished. And then my freshman year was her senior year. So she graduated, she went to Dartmouth, and we were very even at the time. She was a 5 minute miler, I was a 5 minute miler, right? So and so she left and we knew that, but then he left as well. So there was definitely a big void to fill. And there was the school district next to mine that had a really good coach and was much smaller, but had like a good little program going, and thought about going to that school and trying to just keep something, growing, I guess. And there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen at our school, but I ended up staying. And one of the parents in the area whose kid was in middle school at the time, decided to step in, and he did a good job in the fall. He didn't do anything in for track, so then I sort of got bounced around a bunch for the next few years in track with different coaches, and people just sort of taking over the distance group. And but it certainly laid a big groundwork, for me, figuring out what I wanted out of the sport and knowing what to look for when I did decide to run in college. Like that was something that some continuity, some stability, something
mhm.
more than I had in high school was a big part of what I was looking for. And it also forced me, like I was really lucky when I was in high school. Like the Saratoga Springs girls were the best team in the nation pretty much every year. They had, Nicole Blood was the best athlete in the nation. She was faster than me through high school. Like I would have never won a girls race in my area. So, and then, we had some really, really amazing boys in the area too. The Saratoga Springs boys were really good at different points. The Shenendehowa boys were really good. And then we had a lot of individuals that sort of just like were in a situation like me. They just didn't quite have a team or a program. But we found each other, and like between the successful programs sprinkling in with some successful individuals, like we definitely made a friend group that we trained together in the summers, or we would run together on the weekends, or we would cool
Wow.
down together, or we'd hang out and just like, watch a track meet or whatever if we could find something on TV. So I think that also like in one way, it really shaped my experience in the sport to find that community, because maybe if I had like more at my school, I never would have really looked outwards to, find another part of the sport. So
That's really cool. What year did you graduate high school? That's probably the easiest way to ask it.
I was a 2005 grad from high
So
school. Yeah.
that's really cool because I'm thinking I'm a little bit older. I was a 94 grad in high school. And when you talked about like meeting up with other kids that were, of like mind in the area, like that takes technology, right? So there was text and social media probably played into it. And I'm thinking
Yeah.
like, man, back in 94, I had no clue who the other good kids, or and I don't even mean to say good like I was good, but other like-minded kids. Like I had no, like they'd come to
Yeah.
our meet. We had a old recycled tire track that was the best around. So we hosted a lot of meets, and so we had a lot of kids. And we had a team that was really good, Smith Station High School. So we knew those kids. Like, oh, that's the team that's going to whoop our butt and stuff. But would never have had a clue of like, well, hey, maybe we should call them up and go for a run this week. Like I would
Yeah.
have no clue. Like if they weren't going to be in the phone book, so I had
Yeah.
no idea. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. Did you? So you had a lot. It sounds like you had a lot of different coaches in high school. We had, and I wish I could remember. Forgive me, give me grace. We're getting close to 300 episodes, so I don't remember every subject with the coach with it. But one of the people we had on the podcast a while ago in college had a similar experience like every year and I think it was literally for their 4 years of school they had a different coach, all 4 years. And I was like, oh man, because when you were describing that, I immediately want to say, well, how did that? I mean, different styles and not only different like how you coach, like 100 mile per weeks versus 40, and those kind of things, but even the style, like authoritarian versus I don't know the other ones, but you know what I'm saying, right? And I
Yeah.
remember the coach, this college coach, I asked him that question, like, well, how did you deal with a different coach? And it was really remarkable. His experience, I believe it was him, was, yeah, it helped me become a better coach though. Like I knew I wanted to be a coach. So they were describing, like, I learned from year one coach, oh, I liked how they did this, but not this. Year two, totally different coach. Oh, I got a little bit from this one and not what to
Yeah.
do. And this one, were you even in the mind space of becoming a track coach in high school though? Like, was it even like all these different coaches and you're like, oh, okay, I can, all right, I'll take here and there. Or is it just like, all right, now we got John, now we got Sally, now Timmy's our coach, and now Tina's our coach. It's like you kind of get bounced around like a pinball.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely had no thoughts of how the sport would, be in my life
Hmm.
past high school or college or whatever, but I definitely can look back on it and understand that experience. I
Hmm.
think we had a core group of coaches that had various experiences. We had a coach that um, was like a more of a high jump field events coach who had been around for a long, long time. And we had a woman who was a little bit younger, but was a successful hurdler, was an alumni from our program. And, so she would do some sprints and hurdles, but she also took over some seasons and did distance. We had a throws coach that was younger, and a couple of the seasons I know he was in charge of us, and he didn't really have any experience on that side, so he was definitely learning as we went. And so it was definitely like being passed around a little bit, or someone would come in for a season or two but couldn't keep doing it. And so I definitely understand that experience of like feeling out different personalities, different styles. I mean, it forced me. I think the big like linchpin, or like the big like thing that brought a lot of this together was like I was lucky that I was in high school like right when the internet started being a daily thing. And so I, like you had mentioned, like how do you get in touch with these people to like have a community? It was like,
Right.
like the die message board was like blowing up when I was in high school. It was like you'd spend an hour or two every night
Oh
just
yeah.
reading through things. Um, and then I'm really lucky that in my area, in New York, if you don't know, in New York they divide the state up into sections. So and they're all numbered, and in the Albany area generally is section two. And there's like rivalries, and you're proud of where you're from if you're a New York distance runner or New York runner in general. But like the really interesting part was that pretty early on there was a website for our area called the Section 2 Harrier.
Oh wow.
And the guy that runs it, his name's John Broderick. He still does it today. He's amazing, just getting results up, and having a place where you can go look at everything for the week, and league meets, or even just like the section would start to put announcements up, and put things up for people to see. And but the really cool part was he threw a message board up on the website, and so all the local kids were able to go on the message board and talk and chit chat about results and ask questions about racing, and where so I think that was a big connection for me. But something that came out of it was people were talking about training, and people were talking about what they're doing or what they're hearing, or current coaches, high school coaches were getting on there and having coaching conversations. And you
Oh, man.
a coach consistently, um, you know, I guess not consistently having that continuity, but also not having someone who's consistently getting us workouts that you know that were in their wheelhouse.
Right.
Um, that really gave me an opportunity to start to poke around and look at what people are doing, and how does training work, and where do you start? What's the Daniel's running formula, right? Like,
Right.
and I think that's probably where coaching started for me, because I started becoming a little bit more of an advocate
Right.
and doing a little bit more communication with our coaches. Um, but I never really thought much about it. I just went to college and started to figure out what I wanted to do. I thought I just wanted to teach, so I figured maybe coaching would be a part of that formula. But It was always just like, oh, I was going to be a history teacher or something, and it evolved over time.
It's not uncommon. We hear the experience that, a coach when they're a kid in high school has the same coach or group of coaches
I'm
for
gonna have
for
to
their.
move, Mike.
Yep, no worries. Can you still hear me though? You're all good?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So not uncommon that they have the same coach or coaching staff for their 4 years, and because of how that coach treated them, their experience with that coach, like that's a core memory for them of like, I wanted to become a track coach because of that. Having these different coaches throughout your high school, you maybe had a little bit less of an experience of being able to like connect, not just like training to the side here, but connecting like with coach so and so really, for 2 years believed in me, and when I had a bad race, picked me up. It's like, well, you kind of had different personalities the whole way through, so maybe you had less of a connection with coaches throughout your high school career.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I appreciated the coaches that I worked with,
Right.
even if we felt like maybe there was more there, in terms of culture or knowledge or
Yeah.
program. I think having outside connections really helped,
Mhm.
so I could bounce a lot of ideas and experiences off of other people who maybe were going through it in a different way or going through it in the same way. But my coach that I had up through freshman year continued to be a big influence for me. I would stay in touch with him through email. He stayed in the area, so I saw him. He's actually still at his name's Jason Duraco. He's still at Niskayuna High School, which is where he moved from Gloversville.
Cool.
So, I stayed in touch with him and saw him at meets, and he was always like the most encouraging person. I think he understood that there was a
That's
lot
cool.
less stability there. And so he just, always kept a good word, kept an eye on me. And, so as much as maybe there was a lot going on a lot of different levels, I never felt like I was without something, there
Yeah.
was stuff there. So,
That's a great example he set because he could have been excused of like, hey, you're at a new school. He's got things going on. Stay focused on your new community and your new program. And good luck, guys. I don't want ill will on you, but I'm not going to invest time into you because I got this thing go and still invested time. That's what a great example there.
yeah.
All right. So you go through high school. You mentioned as you were looking to go to college. My favorite question is always to ask, like, so when you're going to college, what were you thinking? And you talked about education, maybe being a teacher. So you kind of were on that teaching path. And it sounds like coaching was the like, oh, because I'm going to become a teacher, maybe I'll become a coach. But it doesn't sound like you were going to become a teacher so that you can become a coach.
No, no, I never really quite knew what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
But I figured teaching
Yeah.
was, it was a simple destination, right?
Why
But
teaching? Any family members, teachers, or anything?
no, I think it just I had some teachers in high school that I really looked up to. I think it just seemed natural. I don't know if it was just something in my personality that I felt like that would be an interesting, that gravity sort of into that space was interesting to me. But yeah, a couple of my like social studies history teachers were really I was really close with, and really gravitated into the social sciences, and felt that was like a space that I was good at and I liked.
Mhm.
Um, and so I went to college sort of thinking maybe history, maybe something like that. I ended up being a political science major. Very, very similarly, I found a professor that I really liked, and I ended up taking most semesters a class with him, and
That's cool.
his style of teaching and the content he was teaching really just appealed to me. So
Hmm.
um, I ended up being political science over history, which was great, a little bit less writing. Um, and then sometime in college, I don't even really know, I couldn't tell you when, but at some point I realized like college coaching was a real profession. People did this for a living.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Sacred Heart University in
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And uh, did it occur, and maybe it did as you're starting to tell that story there, did it occur as you're going through and you're finally going towards a major political science, still thinking about teaching, I think, yeah. And did it ever flip of like, oh, yeah, I do want to coach? And you even mentioned like, oh, wait, there's actually a college coaching. Like, it's so interesting. This is a very common story where we'll hear coaches who, when they were athletes, never thought that coaching was a career. Like you could become a coach and get paid, even though the example is right in front of you. You're being coached. It's like, oh, I never thought about,
Yeah.
Coach Thomas. Well, she was right in front of me, and she's getting paid. She's not coming out here just to, to have fun. She's getting paid by the
Yeah.
college or whatever. Wait a minute, maybe I could do that. Did that ever flip during college, or does that occur after college?
No, that was definitely at some point, I don't know when it was, but at some point I realized like, oh, I don't need to be a teacher and coach. I think coaching probably grew in its importance
Yeah, yeah.
and the sport grew in its importance in my mind and how I wanted to be involved in it. And then there was a point where exactly that. It was like, oh, I don't need to be a teacher and coach high school. I could try and just be a college coach and not have to do anything else. And
Right.
definitely by the time I was probably a junior, definitely by the time I was a senior, I had set my mind towards can I be in college athletics. I know because I was using a fifth year of eligibility at Sacred Heart, and before I got to my senior year, and I was thinking about how that was going to happen, I had set my eyes more on like an MBA or something in the administrative side of things and not going and getting my teaching degree. So somewhere before senior year, things flipped and I said, I'm going to try to be more oriented towards, you know, that idea that maybe an MBA is more applicable for a college coach than a teaching degree. Um,
I used to think that thought process was like a light switch. You keep using the term flip of like, oh, it's off or on. It's like, oh, I don't really think about coaching. Boom, it's on. Yeah, I think and it's actually more of that fader light. It's like, oh yeah,
yeah.
coaching's pretty cool. It moves up a little bit, and then maybe halfway up, it's like, wait, that actually could be a career. What if that would be for me? And then it goes full bright, and you become a track coach. Do
Yeah.
you? I'm here's another place I'm really fascinated when you started, I'm gonna call it warming up instead of flipping too. So as you're warming up of like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, maybe coaching is where I should be going, and maybe it's collegiate coaching, and you already are expressing some like bend towards like paying attention to training. Many of us, probably the majority of our athletes and us as athletes, go through as an athlete of just you tell me what to do and I do it and I don't think much of it. Like I don't like, well, why did we do these repeats today? Or why did we do these block starts today? Or, we really don't think about the reasoning, but a coach does. Can you remember back when, as you started kind of warming up and like, oh, maybe I'm gonna become a coach and, oh, maybe I can be a college coach. I don't have to teach. Did you start paying attention? You already were kind of paying attention to workouts and stuff, but did you find yourself starting to pay attention more of like, well, coach made us do this. Let me ask, coach, why are we doing this today? And after we did this yesterday, did you start kind of thinking about the training differently at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think even back into high school, just helping out my coaches,
Mm,
that was always part of like, oh, let's answer these questions together, or let me do some work because I know my coach is just getting into this and they're a thrower or they're a hurdler or whatever, and they're certainly going to think about those programs, but maybe they're not going to put as much time into the distance side. They're just going to have, I can remember we would train indoors in our school hallways, and I could remember we would do the same four workouts, Monday through Thursday for weeks on end. It was just so, that definitely started back in high school. And then, yeah, I mean, I think my coach in college, Christian Morrison, he's very foundational, very simple. We did a very simple pattern of, workouts, and you could figure it out really quickly. And for better or worse, I guess I think it was nice to know what was coming, but um, and I wasn't a very good athlete, so it was really beneficial for me to just have very simple stuff that I could grow in. And
mhm.
but I think there was also an element of that was like we had a big team, and our goal was always to have a big team. And his approach was certainly like a little bit more open-ended. I think that we had the space to have the conversations with him about, running a tempo a little harder or taking something a little easier or cutting back on mileage or cutting back on a long run, or running a long run a little harder. And he was always really open to those things and honestly let us play with that on our own a little bit too. He was never going to micromanage us. So we were always really responsible for how things went. And I think that always keeps you on your toes and keeps you thinking when you've got to really be in tune with how you're feeling and make some decisions or have some conversations that your coach isn't always just going to give you every ounce of detail all the way through every single day. You've got to have a little bit of autonomy. I think that really like primed me to think about how does this work? What decisions are you making to make things better? And it's a big part of, I think, the coach I am today is I really try to get feedback from the athletes and trying to be sort of a two-way street to understand what's the best thing that we can do. And but yeah, I think that all of that sort of goes into that idea of at some point realizing that I enjoy the aspect of coaching without ever being formally coaching.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for coaches to remember about those kids that are asking questions. It's sometimes we get a little defensive of like, oh, they're asking those questions defensively of like, why are we doing this? Why do we have to do that? And I think maybe a lot of times it's those curious kids that are asking because they genuinely want to know more. Those are maybe your prime suspects of future coaches or future teachers, or even if they don't go into that, just being curious helps you in any career path that you may go to. So I think that's something good for our coaches to be thinking of. When you look back at it now, did you have Coach Christensen the whole time at Sacred Heart?
Yeah, he'd been there since the 90s. He founded the track program and still there today.
So that's a huge contrast to your high school career in regards to coaches. When you look back at it now, because there's positives and negatives to both, by the way. I'm not
Yeah.
saying like, oh, your high school career was thrown away because you had 4, 5, 6 coaches. Nothing necessarily tells me that if you would have had the same coach the whole way through, that you would have had any better experience or that you would have been any better as an athlete. I don't know. It's not an automatic to me,
Yeah.
that you have that stability. You would be. It feels like it because of stability, but there's no guarantees in that. When you look back at the two different careers, high school with multiple coaches and college with a single coach, which one did I don't know if I want to ask which one did you prefer, because maybe that's a little bit of a duh question. But can you see the contrast and maybe this is a better question. When you look at your coaching today, how did each affect the way you coach today? Because you had the experience of both. So how did
Yeah.
those affect you to your style today?
Yeah, you're right. I definitely don't take for granted either experience. I think I ended up at Sacred Heart for a lot of reasons. If you made me run through a list of them, I think stability of coaching and certainty of coaching was one of them, right? So I think, you know, that's a big part of, I think on the recruiting side as a college coach, I think about that idea of trying to, people ask, I would say 50% of the families I work with ask, do you plan on being here for, the foreseeable future? And it's like, being honest about,
Yeah, isn't that a terrible question though? Because
yeah, yeah,
I would bet like you said 50%. I'm shocked it's not. Maybe in today's transfer portal world, maybe that is a less asked question. But I remember, when I coached, way back in the day. Now, I stopped coaching when you graduated high school. That's how old I am, John. Uh, that was a very common question. And I remember, and by the way, this is a guy here pointing a thumb, by the way, coached for 10 years and was at 5 different institutions. So nothing like you didn't even need to ask me that question. You knew, oh yeah, Mike's not going to be, 1 or 2 years.
yeah,
He's showing it in his career path. Right. But they
yeah,
always asked it. And I always thought, what a dumb question. What do you think I'm going to say? I am
yeah,
going to say, yeah, but as far as I can tell, I love
yeah,
this school, because you're selling the school. It's just a crazy question
yeah.
that I
I
think
think
feels like you have to ask, but it's like, why are you asking that?
and I think that the value in it and the way I approach answering it comes from the idea that like it's probably how you answer it more than what your answer is. Because
I was
I
thinking
don't
about that.
think I don't think you're wrong at all. I think most kids just know. It's the same thing when you say like, can you tell me if your team is close, right? It's like I'm going to tell you my team's close. I bet you every coach in the world says that their team's a family in the first two sentences of that answer. But it's more about just like how you answer it and maybe the
Yeah.
conversation that comes of it. So when kids ask that, or parents a lot of times will ask that, I definitely approach it from the idea of like, you're not asking me for a specific. You're not asking me for my life plan. You're asking me because
Mm,
you want to see what my response would be
right.
in less detail of what it is, yes or no, but just how I approach the answer. And
That's a good point.
um, so I think that answer comes from a place of knowing in early on in my career how it was to deal with that
Mm.
change. And then in contrast, how it is to to value personally myself, to value the consistency I had in college.
Mhm.
So I understand the root of that question and the worry or the stress that can come from it. And then, I'm in my second year at Brown, so I also understand the scars that come with some transitions. I think Brown had a couple quick turnovers in coaching before I arrived. It was a big concern on with the women that were here when I got here of like, are you going to stay? Like,
Mhm.
can we trust you to be here? Um, Different product. It's a different, feeling day to day than it was in year one. So that's that. There's a lot in that instability. There's a lot in continuity. And you see it in a lot of different places, but I think it definitely it affects who I am as a coach today. Just making sure that whatever the situation is that we're clear about how things are going to go.
Yeah, I think a lot of people search for stability. I think it's a vast minority of people who search for, is it disstability? What would the
Yeah.
opposite of
Instability.
yeah, that's probably better. Yeah, I went to the Ivy League of the South, Troy University, so sometimes my language is a little higher than you might be able to perceive. And those people who seek out instability, you might want to steer clear of them, to be real frank. I mean, it's just not a normal human thing to do, to look for
Yeah.
instability. So I think you're right. People look for stability. And so we ask those questions because, well, you're supposed to say the right answer. We know what we want to hear. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's more on how you answer that. Like, are you evasive? Do you break eye contact? You're like, yeah, I plan on being here a long time. Let's go to the dining hall. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's pretty quick to get off on that one. So
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. All right. So Sacred Heart, you got stability. You got a coach stays with you the whole time. You start career pathing starts coming closer now to tracks, like, or into coaching. It's like, okay, yep, this is where I want to go. You graduate. What's the first step you take to becoming a track coach?
So I graduate and I have a fifth year. So I stuck around and finished my eligibility. The fall of my fifth year, I did not have cross country, so I was still, competing. I hop into some races and stuff. But I definitely was more of a, training and just around practice and, helping in workouts and doing some things that when you can't race, you move over or roll a little bit, whether it's intentional or not. So that gave me a little bit of experience on just like watching the season unfold without I can't do anything about it on the course. So how can I help? How can I be a leader? And then finished my eligibility, got connected with a track club in New York City, Central Park Track Club, and kept competing, but knowing that I guess a part of the story that we haven't really talked about, I wasn't very good in high school. I was, a 10:34 2 miler. I mentioned earlier that like Nicole Blood was faster than me in high school. So, that puts into context some things. Um, and one of the other reasons I ended up at Sacred Heart was because they did have, Christian had a pretty loose, open-ended roster opportunity policy. Just like, hey, kids that he likes and he that show a lot of interest and that feel like they're fit at Sacred Heart are going to have an opportunity. And that was really the only guaranteed Division I opportunity I had. So I for a lot of reasons, took that. And so I showed up and I was like one of the worst kids on a team that wasn't very good. We were second to last or something like that my first year in cross country in our conference. Um, and then by the time I was a fifth year and we had won a couple track titles as a team. We had a couple really good sprinters that helped us get to that place. And then, but I ended up winning 2 conference titles on the track and I was second in our cross country meet and got an opportunity to sort of keep training after college. And I knew that going from like a 17:20 guy to a 15:10 guy, I just felt like I wasn't done, so I kept running and kept running pretty well and ran some big PRs in the couple years after, but really made a conscious decision to try to like prioritize finishing that out because it just felt like a chapter that
Hmm.
hadn't really finished. I was still writing it. I wasn't sure where it was going to go. And it was also new still, like the last few years of college felt like a whole different thing than being not great or being mediocre or just struggling to get opportunities. And now I was like, scoring and winning things and breaking school records and things like that. So just having that balance for a few years after I finished my eligibility, it led me into like, okay, how can I make some money and how can I keep involved in the sport in other ways that will allow me to keep training? So I worked during the day and then I left the time in the afternoons to come back to practice at Sacred Heart. I volunteered, stayed involved with the program. It allowed me to keep training when I wasn't at practice with Central Park, and then just gave me an opportunity to stay involved in the sport. And that's really when I started actively looking for coaching jobs and was like, okay, like I'm running and I'm running well, but this is eventually going to have to end. So I really want to get a coaching job. And I coached a little bit of high school, just cross country so that I could stay a little bit more flexible for track. And then within a couple of years, was able to get my first job in college coaching, first paid job in college coaching. So,
All right, pause there. We'll pick back up there because what is interesting. So you were a 10:30 2-miler out of high school. No one's going to pretend that that's very good. I appreciate your, I love the stats are stats. So you're like, well, I can be truthful or not, but it's easy to go find, right?
yeah.
So I appreciate you, being open and authentic with that. So 10:34, no one's going to say that's very good. There's a, but you continued on and got, so what ended up being like, what ended up being your event in college, like 5K or 10K?
Yeah. So I ran everything from like the mile through cross country.
Like, what's your best mark? Something like I don't really know 10K marks very well. I know 5K marks pretty well. So, and obviously mile.
Yeah. In college, my fastest 5K was like 15:10 or 15:09. It was actually in a back end of a double at our conference meet on a flat 200-meter track, which is weird. So,
Wow. Yeah.
but that was probably a little bit was left on the table. I was a steeple-chaser, so I ran
Yeah.
9:15
Yeah.
in college.
Yeah.
That year that I ran 9:15 was still the regional still had an auto standard, and it was 9:07. So I thought like, all spring I thought maybe I could get there, and I just never quite got it.
Yeah.
We had a really good DMR. We had a couple of really good mid-distance athletes, so we ran right under 10 minutes, and
Yeah.
I was the anchor leg of that. I ran 4:14 a couple times in
Yeah.
that.
Solid.
Um,
Solid. Did
yeah.
you kept running? Did you get better as a post collegiate?
Yeah, yeah. I ended up running well, I mostly it was like 3K, 5K steeple post collegiately. I ran a couple like mile PRs, but I ended up running 8:20 for 3K, 9:05 for the steeple, and 14:37
Yeah,
for
dude, solid,
5K.
super,
So
super
yeah,
solid. I mean, the number of
yeah,
people who've run under 15 in a 5K, it seems like everybody does it. That's not true. There's still
yeah,
that's a heck of a fraternity to be in. What I'm getting at is what I love about this is there's this, it's really based out of fear in my opinion. There's this fear now because of transfer portal, power four, all this kind of thing, that like there's a lot of discussion going on that coaches don't want to develop, and they're really pointing, when people say that, they're pointing their fingers at the power four coaches. That a good friend of mine, former roommate, is Houston Franks. He's now at LSU, and it's like, Houston doesn't want to develop. He only wants 2-minute half miler women right out the gate and that kind of stuff. And the fear, like when I hear it from high school coaches, is like, oh, these coaches aren't giving 1034 a chance to develop. Like, look, you could have had a solid 15 flat 5K guy. That's I'm not sure.
yeah,
I'm not sure that plays in the power four world. I get it, but certainly there's some cross country teams in the power four world. Like you'd have been the fourth, fifth, sixth runner,
yeah,
which those are important, right? And it's like, oh, these kids aren't getting a chance to develop. And what I love about your story that you went to Sacred Heart is, well, look, you did develop, because you don't have to go to a power four to develop. They do
yeah,
develop. I'm a huge advocate. I do not like the discussion that Mouse Holloway at Florida only wants 10 flat kids so that they're ready made. I'm like, well, first of all, 10 flat doesn't even make the 100-meter final NCAAs. So that argument doesn't work. And by the way, the
yeah,
number of 10 flat high schoolers is pretty much nil. It's like 1 or 2 a year, right?
yeah,
So he's taking 10-10, 10-20, 10-30 kids and making them 10-9-9. And that is development.
yeah,
We tend to get into this headspace in the, like using this 100-meter example, that if you take an 11 flat boy and you make them a 10-20, that's development. And that's correct. But taking a
yeah,
10-20 kid and making them a 10 flat or 990 is also development. Where
Yeah.
I'm getting at is that even, and we got roster caps coming and things like that. Even with those, and even with these super conferences, is what's really killing walk on opportunities in the Power Four. You got 18 schools. It's like, man, I don't have time to take a 1034 down to a 15 5 guy. I just don't. It takes a year.
Yeah.
It took 5 years. I don't have time. That I need that.
Yeah.
I need that 934 kid maybe that can become a 14 flat and score.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's still development, by the way. But there's so many. This is what, and this is really a long rambling way of saying I love Coach Christensen, right? At Sacred Heart, Morrison.
Yeah.
That there are a bunch of amazing Coach Morrisons at Sacred Heart, at Slippery Rock, at Fairfield, at Cal Poly, Morro Bay. Like there is place to develop and become really good. I mean, like
Yeah.
really good. Like there are 13 something 5K kids that were 10 something out of high school at Division II and NAIA and things like there's so many places to develop. And so I love that story of like, here's a 1030 kid. I love it more that you were a 1030 kid and not some prodigy 9 flat kid. Like, honestly, I love that so much better. It's like, oh man, here's a kid who didn't give up on himself, by the way. Here's a coach who had I don't even want to call it a liberal policy of walk on, but it's like, oh, okay, I like to have a big roster. That was their style. And you worked your butt off and made the team, and then kept working your butt off, and then contributed to conference championships and runner ups. I mean, that's so awesome. That happens every day, and we mainly talk about the 9 flat kid, the Galen Rupp's out of high school, and we should. Those are guys. Nicole Blood's out of high school. Those are amazing people. Love to watch their careers too. But man, what you did is happening 99% of the time, and is
Yeah.
the bulk of what we do, and that's so cool to me, man. I love that.
Yeah.
Shout out to Mortensen for doing that. Shout out to you for believing in yourself. That's so cool, man. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just
We,
had
I mean,
to go.
I certainly wasn't the only one. I mean, we
Mhm.
had, in the 5 or 6 years in my class, and for the next 5 or 6 years, we had kids, maybe not all of them were 1030 kids. We had some 955 kids, or we had some 430 milers, or, whatever it was. And we got better recruits too. We had, I remember having a kid 3 years below me that ran like 916 in high school, and he showed
Right.
up and
Right.
did a great job for us. But we had a lot of kids that were really unheralded and that like Sacred Heart. And, by the time I was done with my whole journey at Sacred Heart, coaching and all, we had kids running 407 and, 152, 151.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of kids running, sub 25 minutes for 8K that, were right around 10-minute 2 milers in high
Hmm.
school. And, so I think
I,
it's
I
a
know it.
cool,
I know it happens every day because go look at take Division I out. But by the way, you can still look inside of Division I and find it as well. If you go look at
yeah,
who made finals in the mile, and there's certainly 1 or 2 kids who were not. We didn't know who they were out of high school. But go look at the D2 championships. Go look at the D3 championships, NAIA, JUCO. Go look at the PSAC conference, the Mid Lakes conference, and see like really fast kids and throwing things
yeah,
far. And there wasn't that many out of high school. They were not all studs.
yeah,
There's this many studs out of high school, man. So I love development and all the levels, man. I just think that's a cool example, man. I love that. I
yeah.
love that. All right, we said put a pin in it. So you're running post collegiately, and you're also trying to figure out, well, I do need to eat. I need to make some money here. You're helping out. You're coaching some high school cross countries, keeping things very open, so that you can kind of still come back to Sacred Heart and help out. And then you're like, yeah, I think I need a full time. I need to get a paycheck here. So
Yeah.
what was the first place?
Yeah, I pieced together a couple things. I was coaching a high school girls team in Laurelton Hall was the school that I was at. So I was working with them in the fall and then not doing anything coaching wise paid. I was working at Sacred Heart as a volunteer in the spring. So what I had the opportunity to start doing was working as like an assistant AD at the high school, and just helping the AD with some more administrative things and event setups and things like that. So, just getting an hourly wage to, help manage some admin stuff and then help do setups and help, that department a little bit. I did that for a couple of years and then I was applying for college jobs the whole time. And then in the fall of 2012, Siena College had an opening for a cross country coach. They were cross country only program. They were one of the final schools on my list. And it was a school sort of in my home area. Like they had a big basketball team and everybody sort of knew who they were, and also a very good school. And I didn't end up going there, obviously, but it was one of the other few schools that was interested in me in any way. And so I applied just thinking, oh, I could go home and, live with family. It was part-time. It was like, I think it was like, less than $20,000 a year, and it was supposed to be hourly. It was just like, it was just, they said it was cross country only. So
I wish schools would pay coaches hourly.
yeah. Well,
Seriously,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was hourly.
you'd make a lot more
Yeah.
money if it was truly hourly. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so in August of 2012, I interviewed and applied, and they actually hired somebody else. And that was the first time I'd ever have any exposure to the process. Um, and I was like, okay, like that's good. That's it, start getting the ball rolling. And then went back and coached another year of high school, kept working, and then in I guess it was probably March, maybe late February, I found out that the coach that they had hired left. So I reached back out and just said, "Hey, I'm still interested." And they said, "Can you come to campus? Like, we'd love to like finish interviewing you, basically." So yeah, on April 1st in 2013, it was my first day at Siena. And I always remember it because it's the same week that one of our basketball coaches got hired. So it was like, my tenure started with their tenure, and basketball coaches tend to have more notable and knowledgeable tenures, right? When they come and go a little more. So yeah, so from April 2013 until August of a little over a year ago, I was at Siena and spent, yeah, it was a little over 10 years there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know why in my head I was like, okay, after a year or two, you moved on.
No.
So I'm curious, this will tell us even more about you here, John. So you get um, the incorrect way to say this is you get passed over the first time around. They hired someone else. You didn't get the job. It's not passed over.
Yeah.
It's not like they purposely said, we're not hiring this guy. We just said, we're hiring this person. So you didn't get the job though. And there's, when we're looking for jobs, especially, I've said this a million times. This may be my next tattoo. Ego is not bad. Bad ego is bad. We can get some chip on our shoulders, bad ego of like, they passed me over. They chose, we because we're competitive people typically in coaching, right? Because,
Yeah.
from a lot of things in our background. So we tend to think like, oh, they chose that person, and you've heard the stories of like, you've heard this from actors and directors, and I've heard this from coaches of like, oh, I took every rejection letter and pinned it on my wall. I'm gonna make Siena pay for this, those kind of things. And then, short 6-7 months later, you find out that position is back open. That person chose to go somewhere else. It's easy to have the attitude of like, oh, I'm going to show them, like, I'm going to go in and just do a bang out job, and then I'm going to leave. There's some animosity there. Now,
Yeah.
you kind of ruined, you kind of spoiler alerted, you're there for 10 years, so you don't really live
Yeah.
long with that type of attitude. What kept you from having that attitude? That's a very humble attitude of like, oh, it didn't work out for whatever reason with the other person. Well, I'm still interested.
Yeah.
I'm okay to come in and start working now and stay for 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what I would say is I'm very familiar with the attitude you're describing. I feel like that was the athlete I was. Felt like I didn't get a great shot in high school to run what I thought I was capable of. Found a place that wanted to say yes, went there, and a lot of other places weren't. I can remember going to open houses and talking to coaches at they'd stand at a table and it'd say cross country and track, and I'd go to say introduce myself, and I can remember coaches saying like, "Hey, you're not quite fast enough, but if you end up at our school, like." You can always follow up and try out if you improve, whatever, and just getting rejected in that way. So I lived a lot of my athletic career with the idea of like, I'm going to show people that wouldn't take a chance on me that I was worth it. It was a decision that they should regret. And I think that the difference when I was getting into coaching was there wasn't anything for me to say like, oh, I should be a head coach at a Division I level. I've never been paid to coach in college. I'm a volunteer. Yeah, this is a cross country only program that's, at the bottom of the region right now. And It's part-time, and there's a lot of reasons that this would be an entry-level job. But at the same time, like when I did end up getting it to Siena, like I was the youngest Division I head coach in the nation. So like I don't, there was just I think an honesty or like just this is the reality. Like I should be just getting like an assistant's assistant job and being happy that I'm making some money and then go from there. And the fact that I even had an opportunity to interview for a head coaching job, I felt
Yeah.
was probably like a step or two down the road. So just continuing to shoot my shot
Yeah.
for whatever that opportunity was, felt like the right move, and just call back and say, hey, like I'm still interested. You have no business hiring me. I don't know why you called me the first time, but
Right.
I'm still interested. And I guess something obviously connected where I got the job the second time. But yeah, I definitely live on both sides of that spectrum. But I think
Yeah.
this situation was just the reality was I was way under experienced. I was young. I just needed something, and maybe being a head coach at the Division I level wasn't the thing I thought I earned yet.
Yeah.
So
I struggle with it because now at this age and stage, what I really counsel when I hear if you were to say, I was going to make them pay, and like when you talk about when you're a kid, I'm gonna make all those other programs pay, and I think like John, look at your life today. Like if you're happy, if you're truly happy with your life today, well, thank God Siena didn't get you out of high school and whatever other schools because you wouldn't have landed where you are today. And thank God, John, you are where you are today. If you're truly happy, well, thank goodness they didn't hire you the first time around and they did the second time. Like that, all those things led to where you are today. And so when I hear the athlete or like I said, the actor that puts all their the musical artist puts up all their rejections, it's like on one hand, I think like, oh, if that's what you need to motivate yourself. Now I'm a little, there's extrinsic and intrinsic motivations, which hopefully we all know we need to be more intrinsically, and that's a more extrinsic. So it's a little bit like, if that's what you need, I guess. But then I'm like, but thank God they rejected you because now you're doing whatever you're doing doing today,
yeah,
And I wonder if it's really more about age and stage. So like you talked about, like at 18, you're like, I might be paraphrasing here, so correct me where appropriate here. You felt a little jaded, just rejected that these other schools didn't give you a chance, and you thought you had earned it. And it's like, well, John, you were 1034. I mean, let's be a
yeah,
little honest here with ourselves. Not that that's terrible, but it's 1034. There's a lot of 1034s out there. What do you mean you think you earned? But that is a very common 18-year-old attitude. Like it's hard for me to be like, well, wow, 18-year-old, you're impulsive and don't understand the whole world, what's going on. Like that's what every 18-year-old, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I
But
think
now
there's
a little bit older.
I think there's an element there too where like, and I don't know if I knew this at the time, and maybe it's just hindsight that I can say this, but also it's like to be a good athlete, you kind of have to make a story for yourself. Like you have to like convince yourself of some things, live in a place that maybe isn't quite 100% real. Like
Maybe.
whether it's the confidence you have to win something, like you got to imagine anybody on an Olympic final or anybody in an NCAA final, like they've convinced themselves that they're good enough to win or good enough to do something that's like A plus plus day level, and maybe there's a realistic version of that in the back of their head, but like good athletes figure out a way to make the story apply to them. And I think, that was a big part of my narrative too. Was like I knew that I wasn't good, but I knew that people brushed me off and that they could have seen more of my story or whatever. So I sort of lived in that, like, I got to build a story that gives me some purpose, that gives me some passion, that pushes me forward in different ways. And whether I can say that a little clearer now than I could have in college, like I understood I wasn't very good, but I definitely lived a lot of those days like in that idea of like I'm on a mission to prove people wrong because, you know, the means satisfy the ends in that way, I guess.
I think that's a really great point. It reminds me, we learned, and I do remember this one because it was Cameron Babb, the head coach of Washburn University. He was talking about when he was an athlete, he had this coach that he was a decathlete, and he had this throws coach that they just didn't, there was friction for whatever, many reasons. And then he tells, as he's continuing on his journey, he talks about when he becomes a coach, he sits down with this coach at USTF-CCCA, this throws coach, and was talking about, well, now that he's a coach, he's like, well, how do you work with spinners and blah, 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 all this stuff. And he's like, oh man, she helped me out tremendously. And then he drops this little nugget. He goes, it was kind of funny because that's who the coach was when I was an undergrad that I had friction. And I was like, wait a minute, how interesting. As an athlete, you had friction, but when you're a coach, and I was like, oh, maybe this is kind of where we kind of learned together here on the podcast. It was like, oh, as an athlete, athlete is a very selfish endeavor. Like when coach tells you what to do, you're taking it inside and, okay, well, how's that going to make me a better 5K person, whatever, steeplechaser. By the way, I always have to say steeplechase is my favorite event in the whole world. That's where the distance on the track should stop though. 8,
Oh, okay.
15, 10K steeple, we're done. 5K, 10K, keep that on the roads and cross country. I know I just made every distance coach, including yourself, John, upset.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
love the the steeple is primo. Love that event. Anyway, I just always, whenever someone says steeple, I was like, well, I'm going to tell you my opinion. Athlete, so selfish. Coach tells you what to do. You're internalizing on how does that going to make me a better athlete. When you're a coach, it's a very unselfish role. It's, oh, when I learn something, well, how do I digest that and push it out towards my athlete to help them to be better? And I wonder if there's an add-on piece now of, oh, when you're an athlete, you got to live in your own sometimes fantasy world to become better, where when you get out of that, and now because you'd said it about reality set in, on that side, it's like, oh, well, now I live in reality creates paychecks. Okay, that's a whole different world. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a great little like asterisk addition to that. Athlete selfish, coach unselfish. Athlete needs to live in some form. There's different levels of fantasy worlds, but maybe there is some form of fantasy world that needs to live there, which could be that chip on the shoulder for the rejections. That is a fantasy world, because we get rejected every day, by the way, for a lot of different things, right? So
Yeah.
that it really is reality. That's a great add-on, John. Really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I still live like that in different ways, like I still view, at the end of the day, like, and I'm skipping forward and skipping around a little bit on the timeline, but like everything that I feel like I've done has been sort of a developmental thing. I've never gone into a place that was like ready to go, put together, and I just had to keep the car on the road. Um, whether it was high school, whether it was, my college experience, the high school coaching I did and Siena and now Brown, it's always been building something. And
Mhm.
so I definitely lean into that idea of like, we're going to build this. People aren't going to give us the respect, or we haven't earned the respect yet. And we're going to show people that we're better, or we're going to prove them wrong, or we're going to, build this thing that maybe people say you can't do there. You can't turn these athletes into conference champions, or you can't make that program better. It was doomed to be at the bottom of the region, So I still sort of live in that space, and I feel like my narratives throughout the stops in my coaching have definitely played that side out.
Mhm.
But you're right, like in my day to day, I'm not trying to prove something to my athletes. Like you're right. I'm trying to give as much as I can to them.
Yeah.
Um, but I definitely connect really well. I won't say better because I've learned to, styles matter, but I connect really well naturally and natively to those people that feel like they've got a chip on their shoulder, and those athletes definitely live in my natural world.
It's a fine line you have to live in, right? As a coach, like I think about, I was listening to one of the podcasts I listened to is, Hey Dude, What's Up, Man? It's a good friend of mine, Wendell McCraven, and his former athlete, Julie Abel. So if you like podcast, you got to go listen to it. It's great. They do a great job. We shared their first episode as a bonus episode here in season 5, and we're actually got another one coming up. They did an amazing job about the emotional water bottle that I thought was fantastic. So we're going to have that as bonus material here soon as well. But Wendell went to North Central College up in
Yeah.
here in Naperville, Illinois, and he said they won something like 30 out of 32 conference championships or something like that, and 15 or I don't remember what it was. I mean, just so much success, right? And I started thinking, as like, it's hard for sure to build up. You mentioned Siena when you got there, last in regions or something like that. They're not a very good team. It's hard to take a team, bottom of your conference and move it to the top and win it, or if you get to that far. That's hard. No questions asked. I wonder because I've never been involved in a program like this. If you have won, I'm sure there had to be some streaks the maths out at North Central that they had won, 15, 16 conference championships in a row. How do you keep the kid? We're talking about kids here, 18 to 22-year-olds in this example. How do you keep the kids motivated to win the 17th?
Yeah.
And I know it's like, oh, well, they didn't win 17. It's like, well, that's correct, but they all won one or two or three up to this. So, and they know what tailed them. They know they won the other 10. How do you keep them motivated to come to practice every day, to work hard every day, to do all the things that you have to do to win the 16th or 7th, the next one? That is also hard.
Incredibly hard.
I think about McDonald at Arkansas when they were winning all those titles, and it's like, how did you, a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds that could easily think, oh, coach, we're good. We just got to show up and we'll win. And it's like, well, that's not true. There's so many good people. So you have to keep them motivated. That is hard as well.
Yeah.
And so you may have to create this fantasy land, there's probably a better term to it, but of like, hey, they're coming for us. Hey, they don't respect you. It's like, we've won 17 in a row. I'm pretty sure they respect you. All these things to like keep the troops at them and motivated to work hard and hurt at practice to go win the next one. That seems hard, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a special talent.
I've never been involved in that specifically. So I definitely err towards the other side, and in my experience lives there. But in my time at Siena, we were in the Metro Atlantic, and that's where Iona College is. I guess they're Iona University now. But they, when I got there, they had like the longest streak of top tens at NCAAs going while I was there. They are still currently on like a 27 or 28-year men's MAC championship streak. And so I've seen that pretty up close and personal, and it's really interesting and really neat to see how, what it was Mick at first and then Ricardo and now Joe, how they instill the value of MAC championships into the program, and how, and I've seen it, and there's varying degrees, you can tell some guys individually don't quite get it, but they're there and they're doing their job. And then some guys really believe in that idea that it's important. And the thing that was always really impressive to me about the Iona tradition was it was very clear that as a program that they valued the opportunity to win. And it was really, even some of the kids that maybe they didn't take it quite as seriously, they checked the box for the team. It always felt like from the outside that they respected the conference so much, even though they were dominating every year. And I always really respected the coaches and the program at Iona for that, because it's really hard for a team that's trying to come through a conference and working really hard to beat anybody to like tell a story that this is important when another team shows up and makes it feel like it's not important to them.
Right.
So I always really respected them for a lot of reasons, and that was one of them. But we saw that really, really up close and personal. Like there were times when they were just going to win. It wasn't even, they were mad. The few times that we broke them up and ruined their 15 points, they were mad, and
Right.
but that's like a testament to Joe and the coaches there to say, like, maybe we want to win, maybe we want to put perfect 15 points up, and there's an importance on more than just winning and going home. It's like, let's do this in a certain way. So yeah, like I said, never lived it day to day, but I've seen some of those moments, and I don't know. I just don't know if how it is, how it would connect to me. I've always chosen development and progress, and I really enjoy that, but it's uniquely hard to, and we talk about that on the recruiting trail too, is, because I sell the story of we're going to build something and we're making a new thing. But we also contrast it with like, oh, you're looking at this other school that's very good and they've been very good. And I want to make sure you understand that like both those things will be hard, but you're going to be asked to do something very different at both schools. Continuing a tradition versus building something, it has to appeal to you. There has to be a delineator in your experience. Like if you show up to your last three schools and they all have very different, competitive arcs right now, then where are you at? Like you're really not, you didn't make a decision. You have three completely different experiences in front of you. How are you going to make a choice on a college that way? So.
Yeah, that makes sense. That gets into something we've discussed before, and it's easy for us as coaches to not believe this, but not every recruit is your recruit. And that doesn't take away the athletics, like what their PR is. I'm talking about school size, school location, program. To your point, where are you? Are you the Iona or are you the underdog? And there's a
Yeah.
kid that fits in the underdog team better than they do the Iona example, and vice versa, by the way, as well. So it's cool that you've like learned that in a pretty early time, because like I said, there's a lot of coaches that I'm a recruiting machine. I can sign anybody anywhere. It doesn't matter where I work. And it's like, it's not. It's really true, because every school is a little different. Let's work our way up to today with Brown. Talk to me. So you were 10 years at Siena. Tell me what you learned and how that went, and why at the 10th year was there a impetus to change?
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, when I got to Siena, it was cross country only. The men and the women were both in the last couple of teams in the region. It was a huge building, sort of project. And so I took that on. A few years in, I worked with our administration to add track and field. So we added men's, women's, indoor and outdoor,
Nice.
um, which was really, I would say it had an element that was self-serving because it made me full time. So I always say, like, my first job was Siena cross country. My second job was Siena cross country and track. And I didn't have to leave, luckily, but I got that promotion. I got that new job. And we kept building. That gave us an opportunity to recruit on a little bit higher level. Gave obviously developmentally, you're racing at a better level year round. Got some recruits that, were contributing at the conference level and were winning conference titles for the first time. And so we just kept growing through there, and the cross country program was up near the top of the league now. We were getting second, third on both sides consistently. Iona was still Iona, so that was the big impediment to winning.
Sure.
And and then the program grew enough where I was able to get a full-time assistant, and felt like we were really off and running for the next steps of what we wanted. And yeah, had some athletes making NCAAs. My last couple of years there, we had some really great teams that were led by athletes that were on the national stage. We talk about development. I had an athlete, Brandon Olden, who just finished up his eligibility at Tennessee, and now he's coaching in Eastern Kentucky with another one of my alumni. So he came in. His school was cross country only. They didn't have track. He was up from like the Lake George area in the Adirondack Mountains. And I think I gave him a little bit of money to come in, but we're talking like books level scholarship, and he had never broken 16. He was a 4:30 guy, that couple of track races he had run, and he turned into for Siena, for me, he was a 13:45 guy. And
Wow.
his senior year at Siena, he was a couple spots away from making the final round outdoors. He made the first round, about 500 meters to go. He was in a great spot and just didn't quite have the gear that a couple other guys had, but was in it all the way. And
Wow.
he was off to Tennessee last year and had a great year with them, and made some big strides with them too. So we had athletes like that were right at the top of the anybody's roster, basically. I had a woman who made the NCAA meet that year, and I had another woman who's finishing up her eligibility at Loyola, who was another great development story. And it felt like that was like the narrative and the level that we could continue to build on. And that was really exciting, and feeling like, okay, we've got this exposure to this level now. What can we recruit? Like, can we recruit better, and can we keep upping the level? And
Okay.
so I was really, excited for what we had built there, and how the arc of the program and then the athletes as within the program were going. And there's a million reasons why you end up making a decision like leaving. A lot of it was personal stuff. I moved to back basically home. I moved back to the Albany area when I was young, and lived with parents, and I had family around. And by the time 10 years had gone by, both my parents were no longer in the area. So it was like one of those things, like coming home and being with family, and then, okay, like people's lives move on, and there's not that tie. There wasn't that like grounding of like this is where my rest of my family is.
Right.
I had felt like I had built a lot. I had great athletes at the top of the game in our league and making nationals, and I'm always drawn to that development. I'm always drawn to the, building, and not to say that I didn't think we could continue to build. I think that, and I think they still can. I'm a huge fan of Siena. Was the team I rooted for when I was a kid for basketball, and I'm still a huge Siena fan, and I still think that there's a lot ahead of them. But it also felt like, okay, I had like three of the best 4 or 5 athletes I had coached in 10 years, all leaving in the same year. Should I think about what opportunities professionally this gave me, right? Like, and nothing was like, I have to leave, like I'm going to go look for jobs. It was more of just like, okay, this is a chapter change. And I've got to continue to replace high level athletes and see what we're going to do. But also maybe this is this feels, as things are coming to me, feels like a different place in my life. And I didn't apply for the Brown job intentionally, didn't see it somewhere and go and reach out. I have a good group of friends that live in the Providence area that in different ways were connected with the program and let me know that there was an opening and put in a word for me. And the next thing you know, I'm, on the phone talking with Coach Ken, our director, and sort of was like, oh, how did I get here? Sitting down with, at one point with an offer on my lap, like, man, like, okay, I like have a big life decision to make after feeling like I was doing a lot of things at Siena that were really sustainable, but now I'm here and what do I do? And thought about it, and like I said, the laundry list of pros and cons started going, and it just seemed like it was a good time to make a change, and both personally and professionally, and definitely not, where my heart was. Like it was a really, really tough decision, and I don't like hide that from people. I think people don't talk about that enough, but like it was a really, really emotional couple of weeks, and I think people will say like they'll put a face on and say like I'm really excited to be at a new job, and I certainly was excited for the opportunity. I wouldn't have taken it if I didn't think it was something that meant something. But when I left and packed my stuff and left that program, it was really sad. Like I was really heartbroken. I was doing something that felt right, but I was leaving something that felt right, and you can't do both. So yeah, I think I ultimately did a thing that felt very selfish in as you really put it pretty well earlier, in a field that you're naturally supposed to be unselfish. And within a few weeks of being here in Providence, like was getting really excited and got my feet planted and saw all the good that I thought could come of the program, and started seeing the details flesh out and put my roots down, and now it really feels like home, and I'm really excited about the future here. But it's, like I said, I don't think people talk enough about how tough it can be to do something that you feel is really right for you, but has an impact on the people that you love and care about, in a program that I spent 10 years building and put a lot of my heart and soul and made a lot of sacrifices for. So it's really fun, I will say, to be on the other side now, because I can just be a fan. Like I can just enjoy like the athletes at Siena running well, and luckily my assistant that was there for a long time with me is still an assistant there. So I can root for him, and the head coach was somebody who I had known really well. Her name's Liz DeBoll, and she was somebody who I recommended should apply for that job, and so I can root for their success because they're people that I really want to see do well, and I can root for the kids still, and not the stress of having that program be successful is off my plate, so I can just be a fan now. I would say my own stress now, but it's
different stress.
On that side of it, it's fun to be back to being a fan of Siena.
Yeah. It's interesting. Job changes, and maybe you hit the nail on the head again here, John. It's one of the few professions that I can think of that when we change jobs, it's typically a pretty life-jarring occurrence. When I don't even want to put that in the universe. When a CEO, like didn't the CEO of Panera just become the CEO of Starbucks or something? I don't know.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah.
There's no like Panera like, oh, Joe's leaving. Oh my God, what are we all gonna do? Who's gonna come in? It's like, oh man,
Yeah.
congratulations, man. It sucked. I loved working with you, John. And maybe there's some tears shed, but it's like, oh well, they'll be the next CEO. We'll come in and we'll be fine. With
Yeah.
coaching and coaches, it's like, oh, these are my kids. And like I said, maybe you hit the nail on the head because it's a very unselfish pursuit of coaching. It's like, oh, I poured into these kids. I made promises to these kids and their families. Uh, and it's hard to see that, oh, well, there's another group of kids on the other side. In your case, the Brown kids, the kids at Brown University. That sounded terrible, I think, actually. The kids at Brown University it makes me remember, our number one episode ever by a mile is Boo Schexnayder, which he deserves. That's my mentor when I coach. So I love that
Yeah.
he's, number one by a mile. And he said something in our interview a couple of years ago that really like, oh, like I can't believe you said that part out loud, Boo. And we were talking about coaches and our pay and how we don't get paid enough. We talked about that earlier. And, we put a lot of things on the back burner, which we shouldn't be doing, guys and gals, like our financial security, our retirement security, our personal relationship security. We put a lot of those things on the back burner until it's too late. And so he was talking about how coaches should you're able to move up in the pay scale easier when you're younger because you can move before you get to some harder decisions when you're a little bit older, maybe you have a family, etc., before those roots can get a hold of you. And so he said, you should. He goes, if a coach can make $1,000 more, go to that next place. That's going to build up in your retirement
Mhm.
side of it, but also build up your salary requirements for the next position. And then he said this is the part where I was like, oh, Boo, I don't know if you're supposed to say that part out loud. He said, sometimes we don't leave because we think and we should be thinking like we're the best coach for these kids. And he goes, well, if you truly believe that, well, maybe what's best for those kids is that you do leave so another coach who's better for them shows up. And I was like, oh, that's the ego part. You're the best person for those kids. What are you talking about? There's
Yeah.
not a better person for those kids. And it was just like,
Yeah.
oh man, that's a hard thing to do and say. And I was like, well, I appreciate Boo said it, not me. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Hey, before we get to Brown, something you did uniquely that I'd love to celebrate. It's easy for headlines, and it's right for these headlines to go when we have programs that schools that drop programs. We've had several guests. A lot of this happened during COVID time, but we had several guests on here who were fighting to save their universities. We had Clayton Murphy when Akron was doing their thing. We had Russell Dinkins, who was a great advocate for Clemson and other places. I think Brown, you guys went through it as well, probably pre you, I
Yep.
assume.
Yep. Yep.
So Brown was dropping programs. UConn was trying to drop their program. We had Andrew Dubbs on. And it's right for us to point those out and to fight those because they're wrong. We rarely celebrate the other side that there are schools and universities that are adding programs. You added
Yeah.
men's and women's, indoor and outdoor. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the perfecta. That's all four, right? Uh,
Yeah.
Added that. What did that teach you in regards to it's one thing to have if you have a cross country only program, that's hard. Don't hear me saying that's easy. When you add track and field, because not only your numbers are going up, well, now you talk about facilities, whether you have one or borrow one, equipment, many different disciplines. So hopefully you're getting coaching support. How was that process? Because that seems like, just a gigantic process to go from like, hey, I've got, 40 kids, 20 guys, 20 gals on the cross country team, and we run far
Yeah.
to wait a minute, I got a javelin thrower, I got a sprinter, I got whatever. Talk to us about that
Yeah.
because I love that Siena added track and field. That's huge. We need more of that. Let's celebrate this.
Yeah. Yeah. The blueprint was not my original idea. We had a school in our conference, Canisius, where their head coach, Nate Huckle, had gone through the process to add track and field for them. And so we sort of saw that. And I said, I think those principles apply. The unique thing is we're in upstate New York, it's a cold climate. We don't have a track on campus. There's actually only two on-campus tracks. Well, there was. Now that there's a few extra schools, I'm not sure. But in the Metro Atlantic, there had historically only been two on-campus tracks. And so we added it with the premise that it was going to be a distance only track program. We were going to add kids to the roster to expand the width of enrollment opportunity. We used it as an enrollment driver. That philosophy actually spread out into the whole department. Our AD sort of saw the success of the track project and then went out to like swim and what were some of the other ones? Softball, baseball. There was one or two more, and basically said like, "Hey, let's expand your roster by a few spots, and we'll pivot those gains in the university as, well, we're recruiting these kids, and now admissions, and the school doesn't have to, and it's an enrollment driver, and more opportunity within athletics brings more kids in." And so we sort of got that from Canisius and then used it for our program, kept our cross country roster as our track roster, focused on the 800 meters and up. And had a really narrow focus on what we wanted to be successful in. We wanted to be a successful team in the fall, and we wanted to have successful individuals at the conference level in the winter and spring. And yeah, and I think that was really sustainable. I think it was something that we were not going to be able to tackle if we took on field events. We weren't going to have the staff for that. We weren't going to have this roster space. We're a non-football school, so our biggest roster was cross country. And we didn't have, we don't have like a weight room with 30 racks or a training room with 50 beds. We have, basketball, soccer, lacrosse sized facilities. So that was a big aspect of that project, and it worked out well. And we've seen that. I've had some coaches reach out to me and they've replicated it at their schools and tried to, adding track in that way. And I think it's really smart. You look around some of the bigger programs and some of the bigger conferences, and you see schools lean the way that makes sense for them. You see, NAU is really good at cross country, and they've got a full roster of athletes, but they've leaned into cross country, and they've leaned in this, they get a couple of good field events, or they get some good throwers, and they're leaning into spaces that make sense for their environment. You're not going to find a huge distance powerhouse in the deep South, around every corner, like you are in the Northeast, so, or the West Coast or the mountain region. So, I think sometimes people get really frustrated that schools don't sponsor everything and that this isn't this comprehensive sport that looks the same everywhere. But I really appreciate the nuance to that. And, our school, it made sense to do it that way with the restrictions we had. The choice wasn't track and field as we see it at the Olympics or track and field as a distance program. It was track and field as a distance program or no track and field. So, and I think that's often not appreciated by, people from the outside, that just schools don't have the resources to carry 100+ kids, and they don't have the facilities to house those kids. And if we can get track and field to be presented as a throws program or a sprints program or a distance program or a hurdling program, like that's what we should do. We should find ways to get track into every community and make it make sense and make it successful. I think, right down the road from Siena is Syracuse University, and they've done really, really well on the cross country and distance side, but they've got an amazing hurdles group. And, their coaching staff there does a great job with creating world level hurdlers. And they understand that opportunity makes sense for them. And they're not trying to be, a throws powerhouse or a sprints powerhouse. They're trying to be something very specific, and they've done a really, really good job at it. And, we thought that was sort of the way we wanted to approach it at Siena, is just let's be good at something and not overcomplicate it for the situation we were in. And, like I said, I think it was really successful, and we've seen other schools step into that space too, and saying like, okay, let's add track and field on the basis of it helps enrollment for our school. We can show the value. It's a diverse sport. And it's relatively cheap. When the NCAA pays whatever they pay per championship now, you can almost run a track program on those payments. So you're not asking the school to put up, tons and tons of money for extra opportunities.
Yeah, you make a good point. The way the sport is constructed today, you can do that. You don't have to have every event. I'd love for you to have every event, obviously, but I think it's if the choice is, well, don't have a track team if you can't do it all, or have a track team that fits to your school's identity for today, by the way, because 10 years from now, Siena might have it all. It may
Yeah.
change in 10
Yeah.
years. So I think I'd much rather have the choice of like, oh, okay, we'll have a track team that focuses on 800-meter and up. That's fine. I'd rather you have that than nothing, if that's the two choices. Did you ever, kids are hungry to compete collegiately, right? For many reasons. Some of them, that's the only way they'll get to college, right? Is if they're doing a sport. Did you ever have that thrower or jumper or sprinter reach out and say, "Hey, I see you have a track team. Oh, I'd love to join. What did you do with that?" And then did you ever have an example where they were like, "Oh, just give me a chance. Like I know you don't have a coach. I'll coach myself." Did you ever have that example?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we recruiting wise, we would get, kids who are just interested in Siena. It's a good school. It's in a good area, serves the region, and they would reach out and just say, "Hey, this is what I do, and I'm interested." So we would always sort of have that conversation. Hey, this is our focus. Seems like you're outside of our focus, but best of luck. And then yeah, we would get kids on campus that, hey, I pole vaulted, or, hey, I'm a sprinter, and most of the time we'd say, hey, this is what we do. Appreciate your interest, but very, very rarely were they good enough kids to impact on our level. So it was an easier conversation to just say, hey, like, if you're a 53-second guys 400 runner, it we could add you to the roster, but like you're not going to get to any meets because we're going to bring our best kids, and you're not one of our best kids in any event in that sense. So but every once in a while, like I remember we had a pole vaulter that reached out that was really good, and the MAC isn't a big pole vault conference, so he could have scored. But we didn't have mats, we didn't have a runway, we didn't even have a portable box. We didn't, and he's like, "Oh, I'll bring, I've got poles," and and it was just like, that's time from other things I need to do. And, the whole point was to drive enrollment, and this kid's already here. So if we're talking about expanding our roster to help drive enrollment to the school, this extra kid doesn't do that part, and they don't serve our core philosophy. But we would have kids that would definitely, hey, I'll do it myself, or, don't you don't have to coach me. I just need to get to the meets. And, you're like, that's not quite what Division I track and field is. So,
It makes me think that you became someone's chip on their shoulder. It's like, you know what? Siena, Coach
maybe.
Kenworthy, they wouldn't even let me. They don't even have to buy me anything. I'll just show up and I'll train myself. Just get me to the meet. And it's like now they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna show him who's wrong.
Yeah.
What's that?
Hopefully. Hopefully.
What's that saying? Live long enough to be um the villain in someone else's story.
Yeah.
It's like if you live long enough,
Yeah.
you're going to be the bad guy in someone's story. So
Yeah.
that's just funny. A guy who, it's not like you're picking other pole vaulters or sprinters. It's like, no, boss, we don't do any of that. It's just not who
Yeah.
we are. And they're gonna be like,
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
funny. I love that. That 53-second guy, you could have been like, hey, you could certainly come on. Do you like the 800? Because that's where
Yeah.
that's
Well,
the
right.
bottom right
Right.
there, buddy. And at 53,
Yeah.
maybe you got something there. I don't know.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, talk to us about Brown because, Siena being the majority of your coaching experience. And I'm sure, a lot of Northeast schools, so this may be a stereotype, but it's a positive one. Siena is probably a very highly selective, very hard to get into academic school. Well, now we're talking about the Ivy League, where I know you're highly selective, hard to get into, high academics, things like that. It always felt like the Ivy League it's this very unique set of schools that it's really amazing when you go look at the conference meet, the HEPs. It's like, good God, look at these are all future CEOs and doctors and lawyer or whatever, and they're fast. It's really amazing to me. How was I'm gonna call it your immersion into Ivy League? There's different recruiting, there's different rules. There is no red shirting, right? There's no grad students. I
Yeah.
don't think. Do you take transfers? I can't remember that or not.
We'll take on, it's different school to school, but Brown will take a transfer through a third semester transfer.
Okay, so there's some limitations on like the transfer portal's probably not a big deal for you in regards to like you're not checking it every
No,
day and things like that.
no.
So how was this learning the Ivy League and what's unique to Brown in the Ivy League as well?
Yeah, I had no idea to be honest. So, we're surrounded in upstate New York. I was surrounded by Ivies, and we knew that, they didn't offer scholarships and they offered supported admissions slots, and we knew that they had some limitations on, they didn't have flexibility on admissions, they didn't have timelines that we had, and yada yada yada. But I didn't know the nuances. We lose some kids every once in a while to an Ivy League school, and it was always just like, yeah, like
Right.
why wouldn't you want to go to Columbia, or why wouldn't you want to go to Cornell if you're,
Right.
like that makes sense to me. Good luck. See you around. Um, but I didn't know the detail. I didn't know the depth of the rules that the league had specifically. And I didn't quite know the rigor that the recruiting process had, and the vetting and the pre-read process, and just how involved it is. And
Mm.
I guess like how committed you have to be to being at an Ivy League community,
Mm.
to take those extra steps. And we run into that often, in the recruiting trail, is we say like you're good enough, you're a good enough athlete, you're a good enough academic profile, you're a good enough kid, you fit into our program, you could be here, you could, your life could change with an Ivy League degree. And they don't see the work they have to put in to get through the recruiting side,
Mm.
and it that never becomes an option. We fight to get. There are kids that like it's very clear that the Ivy League is a goal. That these types of schools, the NESCACs, or some of the NYUs or the U Chicagos, and those the Pomonas, like that's the world they want to be in academically, and they want to be great runners. So then, luckily, all of these schools are fantastic programs, and that's the bubble that they've built. And then, but there's a lot of kids that we say like, you know, this could work for you, and then they see that public school or that Power Four, Power Five school, just they can get them in and they can get them a scholarship, and it was black and white, it was easy, and that seemed simple. And there are some really great schools academically for, in that world too. So it's not like they're giving up an education, but that's a big part of, I didn't quite understand
What are
that
those
dynamic.
extra step? What's different from if I'm gonna? I applied to college out of high school. What was different from my process? Because I did not apply to the Ivy League, by the way. What was different between that process and applying to Brown? What? It sounds like there's extra. I hate to always say hoops to jump through, but it seems like there's extra requirements. What are those kind of
Yeah.
things?
I think that the earliest thing is just we have like a July 1st hard deadline for pre-reads with admissions. Um, and
But
so we can't we can't move before that July of before your senior year. So we can recruit, and we can like, I've got lists coming together and we're talking but we really don't have certainty that an athlete is a viable candidate in our school until after we submit a pre-read for them in July.
explain pre-read. Is that I thought for a second you're talking about like essays, but no. Now I'm starting to get like maybe pre-read of like their transcripts.
Yeah,
Okay, so
they have
they gotta get through their third year of high school before the school will even say I can't even assess if they might fit Brown's requirements until after their junior year.
yeah, yeah. So, and we obviously like we grow, we have an eye towards what we're looking for academically, so we see it coming. But there's always that really great athlete that's going to be borderline, that you're going to work really hard to get them to be a viable candidate. Um, and you could talk to a kid for 9 months and they could be in love with Brown, and we get the pre-read back and admissions just says there's not enough here. And the pre-read goal is to be eligible for support. So like if you don't get a good pre-read and they stop it dead in the water, then you can't come back in the fall and say, we're going to support this application. Can you help us get it through? Like that doesn't happen. So we really need to get the green light from admissions in the summer
So
that for the crop we want.
so you get a group of juniors that you might want to recruit, and they have to go through the process of pre-read. Is pre-read a black or white, like yes or no, or is it a graded scale?
Yeah, nothing unfortunately in the admissions world in the Ivy League is a yes or no
Yes.
until the admissions
Till
decision.
the actual okay. Do they
Yeah.
can a kid in their end of their first semester of senior year go through pre-read, like, or is it like,
Yeah,
oh, you
yeah.
screwed up, you didn't come to us in June and July? Okay, so it's not
No,
like
yeah,
you
there's
have to do it. It's just it can't start until that July 1 going into
yeah.
senior year. Okay. Mhm.
Yeah, and in the I would say one of the things is the pre-read process is pretty rigorous. It's not just like toss us a couple quick documents and we'll get this done. It's, you know, it probably takes the kid a couple hours to prepare everything.
Oh, it's
And
not
then it
just
probably
like
takes,
it's not like just transcripts.
no, it's a pretty thorough process because they eventually, when we do offer support and then they're in the process for like a likely letter, which is kind of like our version of the NLI, but it's not as cut and dry. Um, they're comparing the application to the pre-read, right? So the pre-read is really thorough. It's a full foundation of this student that they then are confident enough to say, continue moving forward with this person, or you know, be careful, proceed with caution, or hey, this already looks like there's too much that we can't change. This is a no.
So it's
So
more than transcripts. It's extracurricular activities.
yeah, we write a personal statement. The kid has an opportunity to submit a lot of things, but it's the basis of it is your grades, your test scores, a lot of, your full personal profile. But then we're basically saying like this is the person that we know. This is how they can contribute. This is this is the person we've gotten to know over the recruiting process, and this is why we think we want to continue moving forward with them.
And this is the
As a
first big hurdle. Like, so what I think I heard you say is we've got kids that, we kind of initially look at and like, oh man, they'd be able to get in, they'd contribute to our team. And they're like, I don't want to submit this. Cause it's not just transcripts. You're saying this is like, you said, it takes hours potentially for
Yeah.
a kid to do. And they're like, you know what, bro, I can just fill out this application to XYZ University. I ain't got to do all this other stuff. And I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
So that's the first
that's
one.
definitely the start. Yeah. And the thing I would say that happens more often is if kids are excited about the league, then they'll do that. But then when the uncertainty comes back of like, hey, we need you to change your senior schedule, or we need you to retest, or we need you to like, these are the edits that admissions will be looking for to get you moving down to be a really great candidate. Then like those are the things that the kids are like, well, this other school's not making me retest, or this other school's fine with my schedule,
Right.
or this other school gave me a black and white answer right away. Like they said, you're going to get in right away, and you don't know if I'm going to get in. They said, I'm going to get a full scholarship right away, and you want me to fill out a full financial aid profile to give it, get your financial aid to get like it just becomes a lot on the family and a lot on a student.
So I'm hearing the way I'm interpreting you not only it's one thing most of us are probably looking at two things. One is, their athletic prowess, and obviously you're looking at that. And then their academic, like can they get into my school? That's a pretty, those are pretty two things. And then, I've discussed before how much I really think coaches are looking at personality and social media and things like that because I've yet to see a I'll use a distance example here. I've yet to see a four flat high schooler that had a bad attitude not get a scholarship to a school.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't seen it yet. Not yet. Not yet. All these,
No.
it's usually football and basketball where they'll say, "Oh, I stopped recruiting a kid because I saw a tweet," and I'm like, I don't think you were really recruiting them to begin with. To be real honest with you,
Yeah.
it's never
Yeah.
the big boys. Anyway, uh, so you're looking at those things, but I'm hearing that you got another layer of like, oh, I have to recruit kids that want to come to the Ivy League, and that's one thing. I mean, that shrinks us down. I'm also kind of hearing you like it has to be a kid that wants to come to Brown.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Wow.
I think like the thing that people make the biggest mistake from the outside, I think the kids that are looking at our schools often understand this. A lot of them, the families don't, and we talk about it quickly in the recruiting process. But the Ivy League is a league of schools, but it's not a universal brand of communities. Like the difference between Brown and Columbia or Princeton and Harvard is as big of a difference as any other schools that you can think of. There is a
Is
tie
that
here that
right?
they're extremely academically selective. They are really well known. They're top schools in the world. But like I have a filter in our recruiting process where my radar will go off sometimes for a kid that is motivated to end up in the league, but looks like they're motivated more by the status of the opportunity than the specifics of the school.
Mm,
And that triggers a lot of alarms for me is this kid just looking for the school and the brand that comes with the idea of being here
right.
more so than they fell in love with Brown. And Brown
Yeah.
is like Brown, I can speak to, is an extremely unique place. Like they do things differently academically. They have a relationship with Rhode Island School of Design that's unique. They have an open curriculum. The the community, Providence as a city is a very unique place. And the culture and community on campus is very unique. And it's not unique that no one else could ever imagine doing something like Brown, but it's not Harvard's culture. It's not, Columbia or Cornell's culture. They are different schools and they appeal to different people. They're geographically different. They have different focuses academically and styles. And so we really are looking for people that like those things speak to just as much. Like the one of the programs that we cross over with the most is Amherst College. And it's because Amherst and Brown are culturally very similar. There's some art aspects to our community. There's a common academic approach and it's nice to hear a kid who says like I'm also looking at Amherst because it's like, oh, you're looking for a thing, not a name, and we could be the thing that makes sense, but you're not you're not putting the cart before the horse here. You're actually looking for a day-to-day experience. And, maybe we have to work with them on do they want to run Division 1, or do want to run Division 3 or whatever that may be. But like they understand what Brown is as a daily life experience, not just as like the thing that they see online.
This makes so much more sense when I see a news thing about a kid who gets accepted to every Ivy League school. I've always looked at those and been like, well, of course, it's awesome. Like, obviously, they're smart enough to get into an Ivy League, but I was always like, oh, well, if you get admitted to one Ivy League, you can get admitted to all of them. Like, literally, I was just like, well, that means
Yeah.
you can, you're so smart, whatever Brown saw into you, Princeton, Harvard, Columbia, they're all going to see
Yeah.
it too. Now it's like, oh no, these are, what was there, eight teams?
Hmm.
These are
Yeah.
eight different process,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
could get
It's very
you could
different.
easily get accepted to one and not get accepted to the other, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's amazing.
yeah, and I think that's something we don't really get a lot of exposure to admissions directly because they do try to keep them pretty away from any influence.
Mhm.
But I think that's something that the generally admissions makes very clear at Brown is that like, man, I think at any school like this is they're looking for something. They're not looking for the best. There are kids every year that have perfect GPAs and perfect test scores that don't get in. They're
Yeah.
looking for something. They're looking for how are you going to contribute to this community once you get here? Like you're all smart. I tell our recruits all the time, like graduating from Brown isn't the accomplishment. Like you work really hard and you graduate, but like every kid that comes to Brown is smart enough to graduate from Brown. That's like of course you've done so much work for yourself through high school. Like you've set yourself up to have the opportunity to come here. That's the accomplishment is, laying down the groundwork, giving yourself to a place where this opportunity is here. Executing the opportunity is important, but Brown wants you to come here for 4 years and contribute to the community. Like the graduating part is great. They want you to contribute to the community when you leave as well. But like there's so much more that can happen in our community when everyone's contributing to it along the way, as opposed to just like bringing in the kids with the best SAT scores and letting them sit in a library together. So I think that's like probably at the heart of a lot of schools, period, but a lot of schools that are really academically selective. I think their admissions is looking for a way for that person to come to campus and contribute, not just for a way for them to get good grades and leave.
So how do you appreciate that? That blew I learned something. I literally was like, oh, Harvard gets an application and on that application says already been accepted to Brown. They're like, all right, they're in. Brown likes them, we like them, we're Ivy League. So I
Yeah.
did think that Ivy League was this one, like, oh, all eight schools are the same, and knowing there's differences, obviously, but like, oh, but academically, if you're good enough for one, you're gonna that's interesting. I really learned that. So I'm curious then, how specifically with distance, because Ivy League's great for distance. And if a kid is interested in Brown and they're eligible, meaning academically centered towards that way, they got a lot of choices out there. The other, there's always that joke of the Harvard of the South, Harvard of California, those kind of things. But the Ivy League, Duke, high academics, right? Northwestern, Stanford, gosh, in the D3 world, I think of MITs and thinking of Mud Scripts. There's there's some super high academic, and I know someone's yelling at me right now going, what about my school? I know your school too. Um, there's some super high academic schools that those kids would also have choices. So there's only so many kids that run. Let's call it 800 meters and up. There's only so many kids that run 800 meters and up. Now there's only so many juniors and seniors. Let's say those are your recruited aspects. We get even smaller. There's only so many that have the call it the PRs, if you will, that you'll even look at. I mean, you're starting to slice down.
Yeah.
So how many kids do you bring in a year? That's where I'm really kind of getting at. Like how it feels like you got one. Good, man. You got one this year. Good job. You get two. That's a big
Yeah.
class. And I'm talking specifically on the distance side, obviously here. But how do you? I mean, this just seems impossible, bro. That's what I'm kind of getting at. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
terrible. No way.
Yeah. I mean, we ultimately like being in charge of everything from the 800 and up, it hits a lot of areas, right? So we're looking, the Ivy League is very heavy in the relays, and the middle distances indoors. We've got both 4x8 and the DMR. We've got a 5, 8,000 and a mile. So
Oh, really?
like there's an element there where like we're always attentive to the middle distances because you have a lot of bodies required at the championship. We're also attentive to cross country. We see that obviously in the NCAA cross country results that, there are great programs in our league every year. So I'm recruiting in different buckets for sure. So we have a little bit of like multiple agendas going on at the same time, but ultimately my goal would be to bring in, 5 to 8 women a year, to fill all those needs. And they're not all going to be recruited. Some of them are going to get in on their own. And we'll add them to the roster, more on the developmental walk-on side. And we have a lot, but we have a lot of demand. I mean, the league is inherently, even though it operates at a pretty high level, it's inherently developmental because we're not operating on scholarships. We're not operating on, you can't divide up your scholarships. You can't say we're gonna, distance is gonna take, 5 scholarships, but divide them up 10 or 15 ways.
Right.
So we have a lot of really nice things that help us in the process. But there's also some things that the system is a little different and it makes it challenging. So it's inherently developmental. You can look through our league right now, and I think every program in the Ivy League has done a great job of having upperclassmen that were walk-ons that are now contributing. And, so we always want to make sure that we have the depth of the roster so that we can keep that side of the program and keep kids getting better and helping out, even if it's only for a year or two at the end of their career. But yeah, I mean, your point earlier, there's also just a lot of really great athletes that get the attention from really great programs that have all of this. Like if you're a great athlete and a great student and Stanford calls, like, of course you're going to listen. Like, of course, what a great opportunity to have everything that you would want. And, whether that's Stanford or it's Michigan or Northwestern or Vanderbilt or Duke or whatever, there's so many, to your point, that the really, really great athletes are going to have more than just the Ivy League to pick from for great schools. And then, so we're always looking at a mix of how good of an athlete can we get that really wants to be here with what are the developmental kids on the other side of the roster that we can grow and keep our program competitive that way. So, my goal is to have 25 to 35 women in my stable from the 800 and up. But there's no shortage of interest. We have hundreds of names on lists. So
no shortage of interest from actually qualified kids. Like, are you getting all right, I thought I was a pretty smart kid. I had over a 3.0 and I think my ACT was a 26. I was pretty solid from middle of nowhere, Alabama, but I'm afraid I'm probably not an Ivy League kid. But do you get me? Do you get a lot of me's calling you up, be like, hey man, I got 26. That's pretty solid. I ran 4:13. By the way, I did not run 4:13. I don't want to put that on my resume. I barely ran 5:13. But I'm a solid,
yeah,
let's not even say 4:13 because that's not terrible.
it's pretty good.
4:20, right? Like, do you
Yeah.
get a lot of those? And because I feel like those are not really their interest, but you're like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I can't get you into school.
Yeah, I think there's both sides. I think there's kids that uh, found Brown athletically. They were looking on TFERS or they were looking at results and they saw this is a good fit athletically, and they reached out and maybe maybe they're good enough academically, maybe they're not. And then that's our job as coaches to figure out the whole picture as quickly as we can. And some of those kids, there's always a risk tolerance, a spectrum there where we can say like, how far can we stretch the academic side to make this work for this kid? This is a great kid that fits our program's needs. They're a great athlete. Can we get them through the admissions process? And you always are going to push the envelope and see how that goes because you want the best opportunity for your program. And
Could you have gotten me into school? Let's say I was a 413 kid and I was 3.6 and a 26. You be honest. You ain't gonna hurt my feelings. I ain't applying now. So
no, probably
yeah,
not
you'd have been
now.
real gentle and been like, hey man, maybe Troy University,
Yeah.
maybe that's where you need to go. Yeah, yeah.
The test side of it has we've become test required now. So that's like a big element we brought back in after being test optional for a while.
Yeah,
So
yeah, right. I thought
we have a
on the
little
other
less
side. Yeah.
flexibility than we used
Mhm.
to have. But
So you got to be
um,
30 plus, 32 plus.
yeah, there's no like real number,
Right,
it
right, right,
is
right.
because you're always figuring out the balance of all the aspects of it. But yeah, like, the average kid last year, so the average freshman at Brown for the whole school, their average SAT was like in the mid 1500s. So like if you're talking about,
Isn't perfect
averages,
16
perfect is 1600. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your average was mid 50, so 1550.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the variance is always going to be there, but
All right.
you're always testing the waters with a kid somewhere. So yeah, some
Wow.
kids show up athletically, but some kids show up athletically too, or academically too.
Mhm.
They're the kid that knows that they want to be at a really challenging school, that the Ivy League might make sense for them. They might be a good athlete or they might not. They just know this is a school that makes sense and they've got the grades or they've got the transcripts and they've got the extracurriculars and they may be nowhere near the level that we're looking for. So you get both. You get a kid that you love athletically, you get a kid that you would love academically, and you've got to find the middle. And
Mm.
we certainly want to make sure that we entertain both ends,
I
but
don't think it's fair to say you try to find the middle because you're taking the best of both. You're trying to find the top.
yeah,
You're
you're
trying to
taking the
find
best of
that.
both.
Yeah,
You're
you got
right.
to. Yeah, yeah. This ain't the middle, bro. You taking the top. It's
Yeah.
funny, John. My 10 years of coaching, I was a recruiter. That was my thing. I enjoyed it the most, and I was successful at it. I signed the at Mississippi State. We signed the indoor high school record holder in the 400. Top JUCO kid. I was involved in all that. At Troy, we signed some kids that we weren't supposed to. That air quotes everyone's supposed to. That I was involved in. I'm now rethinking that because I think of like the schools that are always in the top five recruiting classes, the Oregon and Florida and Stanford and things like that. And I always think like, oh, those must be the best recruiters. Now they got some positives to recruit against, right? It's pretty nice to recruit to Gainesville, and it's pretty nice to recruit to Hayward Field and things like that. And that obviously helps. Now I'm starting to rethink that maybe the Ivy League coaches are the best recruiters out there because you got to do it'd be one thing if the Ivy League was like, oh, you know what? You'd be a solid middle D3 conference. Like, heck, man, look, because of your academics, good on you. No, the
Yeah.
Ivy League is it's unbelievable, actually. Go to the
Yeah.
track championships and look at it. And they're all having to go through not only now I'm getting you give me such appreciation. I would go back an hour, I would have said, oh, and they have to meet an academic rigor. Well, yeah, of course. Now I'm starting to understand, oh, it's not just an academic rigor, it's a application process rigor, even like it's more
Yeah.
than just academics, not just black and white of, oh, you got this ACT in this GPA and you got this PR, boom, you're in. Like, oh, no,
Yeah.
there's a different level to it. I'm starting to think maybe you guys and gals are the best recruiters out there because again your pool is so small.
Yeah.
Florida can
Yeah. Yeah.
recruit everybody. They can recruit everybody. Obviously, athletically that shores up pretty quickly. And I know they have some academic requirements, obviously, but it ain't the Ivy League. I'm going to go on
Yeah.
guessing that anything. That's amazing, man. That's been enlightening to what you have to do there at Brown, man. That's and by the way, you still have to coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. You still got to get that done. And we talked about these other. If a kid's eligible to go to a Brown, then they have other options like the Stanford. Thank you for saying Michigan and Vanderbilt. Those are two schools that I'm sure someone was yelling at me about. Yeah, high academic schools. But don't forget, just because a kid is super super high academically and super super high athletically, those kids still go to Texas, Tulsa,
Yeah.
UNLV. Really smart kids go to non-traditionally, oh God, I know someone's going to yell at me for this one, non-traditionally high academic schools. You know,
Yeah,
so it's not just that you're not only competing against Stanford, Duke, et cetera. You're still recruiting against everybody.
everybody. Yeah.
Wow. Good luck. You sure you don't want to go back to Siena? So how wrap us up here. Get us up to date. How many years have you been at Brown, and how's it going, man? I mean, this you said you kind of came into it a little bit naive and you had to learn all these things. So are you kind of finding your stride now? Where are we at today, 2024 at Brown with you?
Yeah, so this is the start. I guess we're a little further in the start, but this is the beginning of my second year here. I
Yeah.
got I got to Brown late August in 2023, so a little bit past a year. Second cross country season, on to the second year. This is my first. It feels like my first full year, even though I did show up before classes started, just because I didn't, I inherited a summer training program and I inherited a class of recruits and
Yeah.
so yeah, but I mean, last year was fantastic. I I learned a lot. I think the women in the team learned a lot. We had really young, successful athletes coming in. We had a good core group. I was really, really happy and blessed with seniors that immediately grabbed on to, what we were doing. And sometimes that's not easy for them or not, maybe that's not what they ultimately they want. But they jumped right in and bought in and they had some of them had really great senior years because of it. And now, things are getting, better and better by the season. I think the whole point of me coming here was I felt like this was a program that could be developed back to being a national level program and having a presence in the NCAA scene. And this season's been really gone really, really well, surprisingly. I'm not bashful to say that this, being in the hunt for a pretty high finish in the Ivy League was not something that we necessarily went into the season thinking. The girls have run really incredibly. They've done the work, and it's put them in this position. But the fun part about the league is, right now it looks like third to eighth is available. There's no one out the back, and there's no one that's staked their claim for third. Harvard and Princeton women are very good right now, and they've staked their claim for first and second. Maybe not definitively who's going to win, but for those top two spots. So, so it's really exciting to be in the hunt after being eighth for the last few years in the cross country side. And so, like I said, certainly not something that we've necessarily saw right away, but something that we were planning to build into. And I'm just excited to finish out the fall, and then we've got a really good returning group of women on the track and field side too. So we're excited to sort of see how our group folds into the Ivy League and NCAA side as we get to track.
That's exciting. You mentioned about conference, the Ivy League, and third through eighth is open. It's exciting because you got a shot, right? I mean, third would be third, fourth, fifth after being eighth is bravo, congratulate you, did an amazing job. The kids did an amazing job, but
Hey, sorry about that.
no worries.
My computer died out of nowhere, so I don't know. I have no
Hey,
idea. So now I'm on my phone, but
all good. We were wrapping up, so
yeah.
not a problem at all, man. What I was saying is that's really exciting with a third through eighth because like I said, third, fourth, and fifth, bravo, you did a great job. The kids did a good job after being eighth, for the past couple of years. But it's one of those things where it makes the, sometimes we talk about track and cross country being so much about the numbers and how easy of a sport it is in regards to that. But here's an opportunity, not an opportunity. Here's an example that you'd have to have to look deeper. So if third through eighth really is kind of up for a toss, that means you could still get eighth, but by like 7 points or 8 points, whatever the math works out. And if I'm just looking at results, I'm like, oh yeah, look, Brown's eighth again. And in reality, it's like, oh man, they got so much better. And the way the teams were, cross country is a great sport, a great scored sport. It could be just like, oh yeah, you got 111 points and someone had 110, and that 1 point is what, so it's
Yeah.
just it's a great example of like, hey, you got to look deeper. I get agitated. Well, you'll appreciate this. I get agitated when I see on Let's Run's message board right there. I could have just put a period at the end of that sentence right there, by the way. But when people because I only look at one thread, and that's the coaching thread, to see where coaches are going. When they get on there and they go, oh yeah, such and such school's been eighth for the past 5 years, and it's like, okay, well, let's look at let's be fair. Let's look at the actual results. I'm like, oh yeah, they got eighth that year, but look how much better. Like the kids all PR'd by 2 minutes. Like, you gonna tell me that's a failure? Nope, sorry.
Yeah.
I can't help how the other teams get good too, by the way. But I can affect my team, and you affect your team good, and it doesn't show up on the paper. So so it's exciting, but also like, oh, it could be heartbreaking, because you want to see a 3 next to your name, not an 8. So it could be heartbreaking at the same time. Hey, John, man, I can't say thank you enough. I love, I'm a lifelong learner, so I love learning and to learn. And I've had other Ivy League schools here before, and I'm pretty sure I went real shallow and was just like, yeah, they got to have good grades and be good, right? And just moved on. You have really opened my eyes about the Ivy League even more. I've always had a lot of respect for it. So, but to even now to know what the kids have to jump through, like I'm going to be even more impressed when someone says I got accepted into Brown or something. Like, oh, I know what that takes now. That's more than just being a good student and a good athlete, if that's the case there. So, really grateful for that, man, and really grateful for your time. This has been absolutely fascinating for me, and I really appreciate you sitting down with us today.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Mike. It's always great to sort of relive some of the story. So I appreciate having me on.
Yeah, and it's cool, man. I know this is only your second full-time job here in regards to being at Brown, but it's going to be interesting. I hope you're at Brown for a long time, very successfully, but it's going to be, I love sitting on the sideline and watching, because, we're kind of putting a timestamp on your journey here today, right, in 2024. But, you're going to be coaching 2034 and 2044 and 2054. And it's going to be cool to, in the future, come back and look and see where you were in 2024 and how much you continue to grow and develop as a coach and as a person, and how much impact you continue to have on young people, hopefully specifically at Brown throughout the years, man. So it's really cool to see. It's kind of a neat seat to sit in, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you again. Most valuable thing you can give me is your time, brother. You're right in the middle of cross country season. I'm always floored when you guys and gals give me any of your time, because I ask for a lot of time, and we're over time. He's even so gracious for that. But I know you're in the middle of the season. You're in the middle of that Ivy League conference coming up here soon. So really grateful for your time. It means the world to me. It's the most valuable thing you can give me, to be honest with you. So thank you so much for being here, John.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Mike.
And thank you guys for being here and listening. Again, so appreciative, so grateful. Don't take it for granted that you're here, press and play every week to learn these great stories of these men and women who choose to be track coaches and cross country coaches. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. It's so interesting. And I'm excited to keep doing it. So as we head into season 6, join us next week. We'll do it all over again. Have some fun. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.